Before a realm becomes visible, it exists as tension. Not emotional tension, but structural tension. The pressure between possible order and shapeless energy. Architect-Origin Oversouls were formed to enter that pressure without fear, to sense which patterns could hold life and which would collapse under their own beauty. They do not begin with devotion to appearance, because appearance is the last thing that stabilizes. They begin with load, proportion, resonance, timing, and the silent agreements that let consciousness inhabit form without being trapped by it. Most beings imagine creation as imagination first, then matter, then use. Architect-Origin Oversouls know that sequence is incomplete, because many imagined things cannot survive their own entrance into reality. The Architect-Origin current is not about dreaming more vividly. It is about designing conditions that remain coherent once desire, memory, conflict, and change begin pressing against them. This is why these Oversouls are not merely builders of realms. They are engineers of harmonic structure, meaning they understand what must be true underneath a system before anything beautiful can safely rise above it. The first misunderstanding comes early and it comes easily. People hear the word architect and think of control, hierarchy, or a soul obsessed with organizing others. That interpretation is shallow because true architecture does not dominate life. True architecture serves life by creating enough stability for growth, contradiction, experimentation, and even failure to occur without total collapse. Architect-Origin Oversouls do not exist to control the field. They exist to make the field inhabitable. This is the first vector, and it is mechanical before it is emotional. Architect-Origin Oversouls perceive reality through structure, not because they lack heart, but because heart without structure leaks, distorts, and burns itself out. They can feel where an idea will fail before anyone acts on it. They can sense when a teaching has emotional power but no stable frame, when a relationship has devotion but no load-bearing honesty, and when a movement has momentum but no architecture for consequence. That perception creates an unusual burden in early life. These souls often notice the invisible supports and fractures inside families, schools, communities, and spiritual systems long before they have language for it. They can tell which person is holding a household together, which silence is preventing a rupture, and which unresolved contradiction will eventually break trust. Because they see structure beneath behavior, they rarely experience dysfunction as isolated incidents. They experience it as a design flaw that keeps reproducing similar outcomes. This makes them appear serious, premature, or emotionally withheld, especially when young. In truth, they are often reading the whole system, while others are reacting only to the latest event. They understand instinctively that one outburst is never only one outburst, and one betrayal is never only one betrayal. Behind every recurring breakdown, there is usually a repeating architecture, and Architect-Origin souls can feel it pressing through the surface like a foundation settling beneath a house. That perception does not comfort them, because seeing the frame does not immediately grant power to change it. There is a resistance that rises here, and it must be faced directly. If these souls can see the structure, why do they so often remain trapped inside broken systems for years? The answer is uncomfortable, because perception is not authority, and design intelligence does not erase dependency, fear, loyalty, or timing. An Architect-Origin soul may know exactly why a family is unstable, or why a community is unsound, yet still lack the conditions needed to leave, speak, or rebuild. Knowing the blueprint of collapse does not automatically hand you the tools of reconstruction. The second layer of this first vector concerns why realms need these oversouls at all. A realm cannot survive on inspiration alone, because inspiration expands faster than most systems can absorb. It also cannot survive on law alone, because law without harmonic design becomes dead weight and eventually rebellion. Architect-Origin Oversouls exist between those extremes. They understand how to translate energy into arrangement, possibility into sequence, and vision into structures that can continue functioning after the original force that birthed them has moved on. This is why many of them feel drawn to frameworks even when they reject formal institutions. They may dislike rigid systems, yet still spend enormous internal effort organizing concepts, refining models, building pathways, and correcting weak foundations. They can feel the difference between a living structure and a brittle one. A living structure flexes under pressure without losing identity, while a brittle one appears strong until the first real test exposes its hidden strain. Architect-Origin perception constantly measures for that difference, even when the soul wishes it could simply relax and enjoy what is in front of it. Now the second vector opens, and it is the incarnational psychology of these beings. In human life, Architect-Origin Oversouls often experience themselves as responsible long before they feel safe. They step into stabilizing roles almost automatically, not because they crave importance, but because uncontained instability feels physically wrong to them. Disorder is not merely unpleasant. It produces internal friction, as if the field around them is wasting energy through bad design and their body is forced to register the loss. This tendency can turn into overfunctioning. They become the ones who organize the work, hold the schedule, translate the confusion, preserve the standards, and quietly repair what others ignore. To outside eyes, they may look competent and grounded. Internally, they are often tired because they are carrying not only tasks, but structural incoherence. They are forced to compensate for design weaknesses they did not create, and that compensation can become identity if it goes unchecked. The inner life of an Architect-Origin soul is more emotional than people assume, but the emotion moves through function before it becomes expression. They may feel care as a desire to improve the container rather than as soft language or visible reassurance. They may feel devotion as a need to protect the conditions that allow love to remain honest. They may feel grief as a recognition that something beautiful could have survived if its architecture had been stronger. This makes them deeply human and deeply misunderstood at the same time. Another resistance emerges here because it sounds like a noble identity, and noble identities are seductive. The shadow of Architect-Origin begins when a soul mistakes structural sensitivity for moral superiority. It is easy for them to look at chaos and think they are above it. Easier still to look at others and think they alone understand how things should work. But the gift is not purity. The gift is pattern recognition, and pattern recognition can become arrogance if it is not constantly humbled by reality. This is where life begins teaching them through failure rather than insight. Many Architect-Origin souls eventually build something too early, trust a structure that only looked sound, or bind themselves to a system whose hidden contradiction they underestimated. The failure cuts deeper than ordinary disappointment because it wounds the very faculty they trust most. They do not simply grieve the loss. They question their reading, their timing, and sometimes their entire value. Yet this is how the second vector matures. Because structural intelligence without lived collapse remains theoretical and therefore incomplete. They also struggle with receiving. Because they are so tuned to what holds, they often become more comfortable being the support than leaning on support. To depend on something weak feels dangerous, and to depend on something strong can still feel foreign if they have spent years surviving bad design. So they build internal load-bearing systems that let them endure almost anything. What begins as resilience can harden into isolation, because the one who knows how to construct reliable structures can become reluctant to trust structures built by anyone else. This is why relationships can feel unusually exacting for these beings. They do not merely ask whether there is chemistry or affection. Their deeper system asks whether the connection can survive truth, time, misalignment, recovery, conflicting needs, and the pressure of real life. Many people interpret this as guardedness or impossible standards. In reality, the Architect-Origin soul is sensing whether the bond has a living frame, or whether it is built on emotional atmosphere that will not survive consequence. The third vector begins where the first two start touching, but it does not merge with them yet. This vector is spiritual and civilizational rather than personal. Architect-Origin Oversouls do not only build homes, teachings, businesses, healing systems, or communities. They also influence the deeper geometry of how a realm organizes growth. They can shape the paths by which energy moves, how memory is preserved, how initiation is sequenced, and how power is prevented from rotting the structure that carries it. Their effect is often invisible until absence reveals what they were quietly maintaining. This is why some of them feel called to design worlds even when they have no external platform. The impulse is not fantasy in the shallow sense. It is a reflection of their Oversoul line remembering its native work. Realms, institutions, and teachings are not separate categories to them, because all are environments where consciousness has to move through designed conditions. Whether they are building a metaphysical framework or rearranging a room, the same instinct is present. They are asking what arrangement allows truth to breathe without scattering, Now the vectors begin to approach each other, and the pressure increases rather than settles. The Architect-Origin soul must eventually realize that not every structure should be saved, not every system deserves reinforcement, and not every collapse is a failure. This realization is painful because it invalidates an earlier coherence. Part of them has believed that if the design were strong enough, enough could be repaired. But some structures are built on contradictions so central that repair only prolongs distortion. To reinforce them would be to participate in the very weakness they were born to recognize. That destabilization changes everything. It means their role is not always to build. Sometimes it is to refuse construction. Sometimes it is to stop carrying, stop organizing, stop compensating, and let a false framework fall under the weight it was already hiding. This is not indifference. It is discernment sharpened by consequence. The Architect-Origin soul must learn that rescue can become corruption when it keeps an incoherent system alive past its rightful end. A second destabilization follows, and it cuts even deeper. Some Architect-Origin souls secretly believe that if they design well enough, they can prevent pain from entering the system. That belief feels noble, but it is still control. No realm, no relationship, and no spiritual path can be designed so perfectly that it eliminates grief, conflict, or loss. Harmonic structure does not remove pain. It distributes pressure honestly enough that pain becomes usable rather than catastrophic. Once this is understood, the Architect-Origin soul stops trying to build immunity and starts building integrity. Only then can the synthesis begin without becoming false closure. Architect-Origin Oversouls are not merely builders of external forms, nor merely responsible personalities with a gift for order, nor merely cosmic engineers shaping subtle realms. They are translators between force and form. They know that energy without design dissipates, and design without life calcifies, so their true function is to create containers that can remain alive under pressure. This is why their path is never only practical and never only mystical. If they mature, they become capable of something rare. They can stand inside complexity without romanticizing collapse or worshiping order. They can tell when a system needs reinforcement, when it needs redesign, and when it needs permission to fail. They can hold tenderness without becoming porous, and standards without becoming rigid. They can build in a way that welcomes change instead of fearing it. That capacity is not a personality trait. It is the harmonized expression of their oversoul current, moving cleanly through human life. When they do not mature, the gift turns hard. They become controllers, perfectionists, structural cynics, or exhausted stabilizers who secretly resent what they keep preserving. They may call their rigidity wisdom and their fatigue sacrifice, but the field always tells the truth eventually because dead structure cannot hide forever. The soul that was born to design living coherence will feel the rot inside any system it props up falsely. That inner friction becomes unbearable, and sooner or later it forces reckoning. So the Architect-Origin episode is not really about admiration for cosmic builders. It is about responsibility, discernment, and the cost of carrying structural sight in a world that often prefers improvisation over integrity. These souls are not here because they love rules. They are here because life itself requires honest containers. When a realm forgets that, beauty becomes unstable. Love becomes performative, power becomes predatory, and meaning starts leaking through cracks no one wants to repair. If you carry this architecture, your task is not to become harder. Your task is to become cleaner in your relationship to what you build, what you reinforce, what you release, and what you refuse to hold together any longer. You are not here to save every structure from collapse. You are here to know which structures can carry life, which ones can be redesigned, and which ones were never sound enough to deserve your strength. Only then does your building stop being compensation and become what it was always meant to be. The most dangerous lie an Architect-Origin soul can believe is that sound structure will protect them from betrayal. That lie feels reasonable because structure does prevent many forms of waste, confusion, and collapse. It teaches sequence, responsibility, and consequence. So the soul begins trusting design as if design were a shield. But betrayal does not always enter through weak architecture. Sometimes it enters through the very structures you built to keep life coherent. This is the first destabilization that Part 1 did not complete. It is not enough to know which systems can hold life and which systems should be allowed to fall. Architect-Origin Oversouls must also face the fact that good design attracts dependency, envy, imitation, and quiet exploitation. The moment you become someone who can build reliable containers, others begin using your reliability to avoid building their own. What looked like collaboration can turn into structural parasitism before the Architect-Origin soul realizes what is happening. This cuts deeper than ordinary disappointment because the wound lands inside identity. These souls do not merely offer effort. They offer framework, timing, coherence, and often the unseen labor that keeps everything from dissolving. So when others consume that labor without growing stronger themselves, the Architect-Origin soul does not only feel tired, they feel used at the level of design, as if their gift has been converted into a shelter for other people's immaturity. That creates the first vector of this movement, and it concerns extraction rather than construction. Many Architect-Origin souls discover too late that they have spent years reinforcing structures that were never meant to become mutual. They may have built businesses, relationships, teachings, or communities that function beautifully from the outside while hiding a central distortion underneath. The distortion is simple and brutal. One side is building capacity while the other side is consuming it. This is not always obvious in the beginning because early reciprocity can be mimicked. Appreciation can look like partnership. Agreement can look like shared standards. Admiration can look like respect. But admiration without responsibility is one of the oldest traps in the Architect-Origin life, because these souls are often praised most when they are overcarrying. The praise feels validating until they realize it arrives precisely when everyone else is becoming structurally weaker around them, so the next correction must land cleanly. Not every structure that survives is healthy, and not every structure that depends on you deserves preservation. Longevity is not proof of harmony. Sometimes a system survives because one Architect-Origin soul has quietly absorbed its contradictions long enough to keep others from feeling the cost. What appears stable can actually be subsidized collapse, and the Architect-Origin soul must learn to recognize that before their body becomes the final support beam. That bodily consequence matters because these souls often translate structural overload into physical endurance. They keep going long after the field has become unsound. They become efficient, disciplined, and strangely detached from fatigue because function has trained them to treat depletion as temporary rather than diagnostic. Yet the body always knows earlier than the mind when the architecture has become false, and it begins signaling through tension, numbness, insomnia, inflammation, and the slow erosion of joy. This leads into the second movement of the first vector. Architect-Origin souls are often less afraid of hard work than they are of incoherence. Because of that, they can misread over responsibility as virtue. They may believe that their willingness to carry extra weight proves maturity, when in truth, it may only prove old conditioning. The deeper question is not whether they can hold the structure. The deeper question is whether the structure becomes more alive because they are holding it. If the answer is no, another destabilization begins. Many Architect-Origin souls are not exhausted because they build too much. They are exhausted because they keep repairing what should be exposed. They sense the crack, name the crack, and then compensate for the crack rather than forcing the system to confront it. This is understandable because collapse affects everyone, and these souls hate waste. But repeated compensation turns wisdom into complicity. Once that is seen, the second vector opens, and it has nothing to do with labor alone. It concerns power. Architect-Origin Oversouls are unusually vulnerable to roles that give them influence without true authority, because they are good at making things function even when the official leadership is weak. Organizations, families, and spiritual communities often place them near the center without naming what they are actually doing. They become invisible governors of coherence, carrying responsibilities that exceed their title, while absorbing blame that exceeds their freedom. At first, this can feel meaningful. The soul sees that they are trusted with real weight, and weight often feels like purpose. But weight without authority is a dangerous arrangement, because it requires responsibility without the right to redesign root conditions. The Architect-Origin soul ends up accountable for outcomes they do not fully control. They become the stabilizer of structures whose deeper rules were set by others, which means they are forced to preserve forms they did not choose and answer for failures they could not completely prevent. This is why many of them have such complicated relationships with leadership. They do not always want the top position, but they often become resentful of those who hold it badly. They can see exactly where the system is leaking and exactly why the official center remains inadequate. Yet stepping forward does not always solve the problem, because once they become visible leadership, the same extraction patterns may simply intensify. Their gift attracts need, and need often disguises itself as devotion. There is a temptation here that must be named directly. Some Architect-Origin souls begin to fantasize that if they were simply given full control, coherence would finally prevail. That fantasy contains truth and distortion at the same time. Yes, many systems would function better under their guidance, but total control would also tempt them toward rigidity, because the more precisely they see consequence, the easier it becomes to justify over-designing the lives of others. This is where the shadow of Architect-Origin reveals its sharper face. The shadow is not only perfectionism. The deeper shadow is benevolent domination, the conviction that order grants the right to decide for everyone. It can appear kind, efficient, and even wise, yet still violate life by over-determining it. Architect-Origin souls must learn that living coherence requires room for spontaneity, error, refusal, and non-linear growth, or else their structures become elegant prisons. That lesson is usually learned through disappointment with people. They build a system that could support growth, and then discover that many people do not want coherence if coherence requires accountability. They want comfort, access, and shelter without transformation. This wounds the Architect-Origin soul because they are not merely being rejected. Their very understanding of what support is for becomes challenged. They built the container to help life mature, while others entered it hoping to remain unchanged. Now the power vector deepens into ethics. These souls must decide whether structure exists to enforce outcomes or to create conditions where truth can emerge freely. That distinction changes everything. If structure exists to enforce outcomes, then control becomes increasingly rational. If structure exists to create honest conditions, then the Architect-Origin soul must tolerate uncertainty, because even the best design cannot guarantee what living beings will do inside the form. That uncertainty is not a side issue. It is the exact place where many of them become hard. They can handle work, complexity, and long timelines better than most. What they struggle with is watching good structure be misused, ignored, or wasted. The grief there is immense because it feels like desecration of possibility. Something viable was offered, and life still chose distortion. This grief opens the third vector, and it is the one most people around them never see. Architect-Origin Oversouls are often mourners of unrealized futures. They do not only feel pain about what failed, they feel pain about what could have thrived under different conditions. Every broken system carries for them not just loss, but the ghost of a better design that almost entered reality and then did not. They live with near forms, near worlds, near harmonies, and that haunting gives their seriousness its true depth. Because of this, their relationship to time is distinct. They do not experience decisions only in the present tense. They can feel downstream consequence quickly, and they also feel alternate outcomes that would have emerged if one structural choice had been different. This can make them look intense or unforgiving. In truth, they are often standing in contact with several timelines at once, measuring the cost of what has already been set in motion. There is another correction here that unsettles what came before. These souls do not merely build structures in the outer world. They also build anticipatory architectures inside themselves, internal systems of discipline, restraint, backup plans, and emotional sequencing designed to prevent future collapse. This inner architecture can become so advanced that the person stops feeling spontaneous even when alone. They become safe, functional, and internally partitioned, which is not the same as whole. That inner partitioning is rarely obvious because it often looks like maturity. The soul can regulate, endure, produce, and remain clear under pressure. But beneath that competence, there may be an ancient bargain. If I design myself well enough, nothing will enter that I cannot survive. This bargain creates remarkable strength, yet it also restricts intimacy, surprise, and the forms of love that require unplanned vulnerability. The Architect-Origin soul ends up living inside a finely engineered interior that sometimes protects them from life as effectively as it protects them from harm. So the third vector becomes a study of surrender without collapse. These souls must discover that living structures include permeability. A completely sealed system cannot be wounded easily, but it also cannot be nourished deeply. Permeability feels dangerous because it introduces unplanned force into the architecture. Yet without it, the soul remains a fortress mistaken for a home. The work is not to abandon standards or design. The work is to let design become alive enough to receive what it did not predict. Only now can the vectors begin touching each other without flattening into summary. Extraction taught them that not every structure deserves their strength. Power taught them that control can corrupt even noble design. Time taught them that unrealized possibility can become a private grief, if not metabolized into wisdom. When these three recognitions begin resonating together, the Architect-Origin soul finally understands that their gift is not measured by how much they can hold together. It is measured by how truthfully they can build in alignment with life. That alignment changes the kind of systems they create. They stop designing for admiration and start designing for honest use. They stop mistaking indispensability for purpose. They stop reinforcing structures that become coherent only through their quiet self-abandonment. Instead, they build containers that reveal who is willing to participate in maturity and who only wanted shelter. This makes their work less universally liked and far more real. It also changes how they love. They begin looking not only for emotional sincerity, but for reciprocal load-bearing capacity. They notice who can hold tension without fleeing into drama, who can accept correction without collapsing into shame, and who can contribute to a shared structure rather than merely benefiting from one. Love stops being measured by intensity alone. It becomes measurable through how well the connection metabolizes truth over time. And when this maturity reaches the spiritual level, the original Oversoul function finally clears. Architect-Origin souls were never here merely to build more. They were here to participate in the lawful generosity of form itself, the mystery by which energy becomes inhabitable without being imprisoned. Their deepest service is not perfect order. It is living design, structure that can host freedom without dissolving, and consequence without cruelty, and transformation without theatrical collapse. This is why their path feels so exacting. The realm uses them to test whether a form can remain alive under pressure. Their relationships test it. Their work tests it. Their own body tests it. If the structure is false, life will grind against it until truth appears. If the structure is sound, life will deepen inside it and reveal possibilities that weaker containers could never have held. The Architect-Origin soul learns, slowly and painfully, to trust that distinction more than praise, more than role, and more than their old need to be the one who saves the design from itself. By then, they no longer build from fear of collapse. They build from intimacy with consequence. They no longer preserve every system that once depended on them. They choose where to place foundation, where to remove support, where to redesign sequence, and where to leave emptiness until a truer pattern arrives. That is when the gift becomes unmistakable. Not because it looks grand, but because everything around it begins holding more life than it did before. If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Haret library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.